The views expressed in this interview are those of the individuals and do not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, or the Naval Postgraduate School. Welcome to the Trident Room, brewer of stout conversation, unfiltered and on tap. On today's episode, Trident Room host Michael Wish sits down with NPS Scheduler Jennifer Barnhill.
All right, well, welcome, Jennifer, to the Trident Room podcast. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to talk with you.
Yeah, so before we get into the ins and outs and all the fun of scheduling, if you could just tell me, we've already read your bio, obviously, but maybe tell me something a little bit about yourself and how you got here.
Well, I think, as you'll probably mention, I am a military spouse. My husband's orders brought us here. He is a student at NPS, and I joined the scheduling office recently. I have 3 kids. We live here. We're going to live here for a couple more years. My professional background is actually journalism and marketing, PR. And so somehow I found my way into scheduling. Does not make sense. We, as military spouses, we juggle a lot. So I think that those things go hand in hand because there's a lot of juggling involved in the scheduling office.
I think a lot of students understand that,
yeah.
Right? Especially military spouses and having to move around and find different occupations.
Yeah. So I've worn a lot of different hats, and I think that that's just part of life. And I'm thrilled to be at NPS. It's a beautiful location.
It is.
Tons of people coming in and out and getting to meet new people. It's awesome.
Yeah, well, very good. So we have lots of questions. Students always have lots of questions about schedules. We're not going to talk about the easy ones. If you want to go ask the frequently asked questions, there happens to be a frequently asked questions page on the scheduling website. So if you're looking for the softballs, please go there and you can read about that.
Okay,
there.
I'm ready then. You're going to bring it then.
Here's some. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I don't know.
I don't know if I'm
ready. I don't know if we're going to bring it.
Okay.
Well, let's just start with kind of a general overview. What are the biggest challenges and what are the most unique challenges here at NPS when it comes to scheduling? Because my understanding is that it is different than some other universities.
So if you rewind very far back to when you were in undergrad, potentially.
That was a long time ago for most of us.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to give dates for how long ago that was for me, but it was a while ago. For many of us, it's been a while. So if you remember waking up at maybe 8 a.m. to try to select the class at the preferred time that you wanted, right? That's
with
how
the
you,
professor
with the professor that you wanted. Make sure you got the right elective. Hopefully get your only come to class 2 days a week kind of thing. Well, that is how undergrad works. That is how a lot of even graduate schools work, but that is not how NPS works. As we all know, our students are tied here with their orders. So the way that our scheduling system worked is our goal is to make sure that every student that comes to NPS graduates on time. So what does that mean? It means there's this idea of demand and supply-based scheduling. And we schedule so that every student gets every request on their matrix. And so in order to do that, we have a lot of deconfliction. So that's why we see classes at 8 a.m. or at 5 o'clock. We try to minimize those, but essentially, all preferences are secondary. As we know, as our students know, constraints are never good. We want to optimize the schedule, and to do that, we have to really, and while working on 100% on-time graduation, we have to kind of make it work. It's a big puzzle, and we have an awesome software that helps us do that, but we really focus on getting everyone in and out with every class that they need to graduate on time.
Okay, so with the constraints, obviously, this is kind of a big linear algebra problem or a big network science problem.
Yes. And
right? And
I'm assuming the students will know how to solve some of these things way better. Thankfully, we have the software.
Maybe some of them do. Yeah. But when you get the initial kind of requests and Python gets locked, and then you say run it through this software, I assume that the first step is it immediately alerts you to how many conflicts.
Yes. And if
hundreds or?
I mean, well, first of all, we put in a system, but we also have restraints. So we're not allowed to schedule students during the lunch hour. So there's things that we don't do as a scheduling office. There are instructions, NPS or military instructions that prevent us from doing, not prevent us, but they have guidelines. We don't want students to be burnt out. So we want to make sure that we give them breaks. Oh, you'd like breaks to eat and things like that. or coffee. And so there's things like that we have to build into the schedule. We also have faculty who often, some of them are located farther away, and we have to account for those travel preferences. We also try to keep everybody in this, I mean, this is pre-COVID, so sometimes COVID is very different, and it's made scheduling very strange. So we're talking like,
we got some questions there too, but we'll hold off on that
so
for now.
this is all stuff. I'm thinking pre-COVID when I'm talking about some of these constraints, because clearly COVID has brought in tons of other constraints. But we have a lot of factors, human factors generally, that we have to build into the system that limits when we can have things. We also have different departments offering classes at different time blocks. So we have in the GSDM department, they have two-hour classes offered Mondays, Wednesdays, or Tuesdays, Thursdays. We also have departments like the OR department where they have 1 hour a week, a day for 4 days a week to account for the same amount of time. When you then put those different constraints into the system, it is difficult if a student decides to take an elective in another department. And then you're kind of mixing all of these factors together, making it very hard to accommodate everyone at optimal hours, which would probably be, let's say, 10 o'clock or 1 o'clock, and then everyone gets to go home early, minimize commute, all of those things. We do actually have a heavy hand in customizing the schedule to account for those things. So when we finish the schedule, when the system puts things together, and then we review it one by one to make sure that all the requests have been entered properly, that there were no errors. We also look at those 5 o'clock classes, we look at those 8 o'clock classes and see if we can shift things, like force the system to break protocol, so to speak. And maybe you see a class that is 1 hour here, 1 hour there, and it doesn't follow a direct pattern. It's because we're trying to minimize those undesirable hours. So that's kind of a basic overview of what happens when Python is locked and you can't see what's going on with your schedule. We're basically working through those requests. Also, we're different because we are a military university. We have a lot of changes when it comes to student population, people coming in, departments making changes after the schedule has been locked. And so things are happening behind the scenes that maybe the students don't know, which impact the way that we do the schedule.
Yeah, I think so. Maybe that partially answers kind of the big question that most students have, which is, why don't I get my schedule before a week or two before the quarter starts, which makes obviously planning on our side very difficult for childcare and appointments and so on and so forth.
It definitely is hard. And we have, so all the dates that we have in our system, we have scheduled release dates for the schedule. I mean, obviously those are based on military instruction, but they're established dates ahead of time. What I would say to that is we have, prior to COVID, we started releasing the schedule earlier, which if you haven't been here very long, and many students may not have been, we would release it, I would say, a couple days early. We're working to get it even further, earlier than we have been in the past, and that's the goal of our office, to get it out there. The issue with that is that once the schedule is released and Python is unlocked, the schedule changes are kind of blind. So the departments might switch a segment, but that really relies upon those departments to deconflict instead of, because they don't have our system that deconflicts the student schedules. So if the department wants to make a change, often they'll ask us, will this work? But we can't always see, because, if you're over here doing something at your department, someone else is over here doing something at their department, those changes are not managed by our office anymore. And therefore, there are a lot of conflicts that happen after. But amazing, ed techs and program officers are trained to prevent those things from happening. It's just, human error can always happen once it's outside of one centralized system.
So you're saying once Python is unlocked and the schedule is released, then there are some departments that still make changes even after that happens. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, yes. And it happens a lot. So if a student wants to change a segment, if they see, just like you're saying, we're all humans. I have kids. Everyone, you have things to plan for. You see a class that's offered maybe at a different time, but that is more appealing to you because you know you want to drop this other class, now you can take it. Well, we didn't know you wanted to drop that class. So you can make those changes after the schedule is released, assuming that it's okay with your program officer and your ed tech and your department. And that is where all of those changes are managed. We don't manage individual changes after the schedule is released. If there's an individual change that you want to make sure your department knows to tell us about while Python is locked, obviously reach out to your department. And they do have and often reach out to us making changes. So it is a ongoing conversation. The schedule, my boss, Adrian Gera, who he likes to say every schedule is a compromise. It's also a puzzle.
Yeah.
It's a puzzle, and we often are playing with the puzzle flipped upside down and the pictures are not showing, so we don't always have the full picture. So it's our job to kind of get that picture together.
So, well, I guess I have two questions. Yeah. We'll get to COVID in a second. That'll be my second. The first is, what would happen if you were, say, forced to release the schedule 2 or 3 weeks earlier than it is currently now? Like, what would be the effects of that?
I mean, as far as our office, we would probably need to shift deadlines for the departments because a lot of times they're working on their budgets and not sure how many courses they can offer. They have to secure the instructors. So it would just push some other deadlines a little bit, adjust those deadlines a little bit. We obviously would work really hard to get it done on time if that was, the requirement, absolutely. The other consequence would be, again, on the back end, we've noticed that there are a lot of changes, and that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. Change isn't always bad. It could be wonderful and great, but we just want to make sure that if there are changes, just as organization, how do you measure all of that? That matters. Knowing data matters. So if we can't monitor that, and whether that's in our office or outside, how are we going to know if these processes are best supported? So, it is a conversation that is interesting. And again, my boss will get mad at me if I overcommit to say, yeah, that sounds like a great idea.
Of course.
But
yeah. I guess I was just trying to get to maybe kind of the key foundational issue to try to answer that question for the students, right? Is there's always a cost, right? And so the earlier you move that back, in this case, it sounds like, if I've heard you right, that the cost actually occurs on the departments now. They have less time to figure out what courses they're going to teach, figure out the budget, commit professors to those courses. Yeah. And maybe a potential consequence would be, okay, the schedule comes out early, but now there's additional conflicts, and it's going to be harder to work through on the back end.
And that is true. I mean, I would defer to the departments as to how that might impact them and what their timelines are like right now, as to those budgets and funding is very different. I'm sure you've had people talk about how, NPS receives funding for research and all that. So there's so many components, and the schedule is kind of intertwined in some of those decisions. It has its fingers in a lot of places. So
yeah. One more question before we move on to the COVID impacts is, would it help at all if the students have the ability, when submitting their schedules, to indicate if there were additional constraints? For example, there's lots of students here that don't have children that may be fine with a different schedule, expanded hours, the 8 to 9s and the 3 to 5 o'clock classes. Or there may be students that say, I'm trying to do this cross-department thing, but I'm not that committed to that class, right? And so if you can lower me on the priority level, if that cross-department class issue is really creating issues. I mean, would it be helpful to have some additional, kind of highlight constraint options when submitting a schedule, so that you could it would help with that software program figure that answer out?
And there is that a little bit in one way. So you have the option to do for your matrix. It is required courses, electives. So there's general electives and curriculum electives,
which you have to put in backup courses. I've noticed.
Yes. And so often, and we increasingly, when we're looking at our information, students or faculty or the departments are listing everything as a requirement, and and that makes it very difficult, because if our way to triage, so to speak, these priorities for students, we look to that, because we don't have the ability to put in, a childcare constraint for every student or things that specifically. But if we know that your bottom line classes are these 4 classes, then we will prioritize those classes. Then our system will prioritize those classes. So making sure that when you put in your requests for courses, if it's an elective, please list it as an elective, because that way we won't then force you out to a 5 o'clock class just so you can get this one elective. And then you've also forced, not you, but the system has also forced other people to 5 o'clock because you have this elective listed as a priority. This is just one example, and the same is true if you take a class outside of your department. That one person becomes that, outlier, and in order to schedule with all those constraints, it puts those weird situations. So if you find that there's some curriculums that cross departments a lot, and it's very difficult to have a wonderful, glorious, 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock schedule with those curriculums. It's pretty hard.
So it's my fault because I'm a dual math and physics major.
Yeah, I mean,
taking classes.
What was your phone number again? Who should they call if they want to complain? No, it's no one's fault. It's just we want everyone to get the classes that they need while they're here, and in order to do that, it is harder. It makes it look messier in order to do that. So if everything is clean, there are some departments that just no problems, that they get the times that they like and all those things because they have, they don't exit their department very often. So
well, it sounds like someone out there who's studying network science maybe there's a problem here they could tackle and see if additional options or feedback provided by the students as to what their constraints are would help or hurt that situation.
There are ways to build that in, and it's definitely a conversation that our office would be interested in having.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's move on to the next big piece then, which is how much more difficult are things now due to COVID? And maybe you can, some of the feedback that I got from other students is that there seems to be more 8 to 9 and 3 to 5 classes since COVID has started. Is that true? And kind of how's everybody handling it?
It is 100% true because we own, so you think about NPS, you look at the campus, it looks huge and so big. I'm going to ask you a question, if that's okay. Can I ask you? Okay.
Yeah.
So how many classrooms do you think that the scheduling office manages?
Oh, that's a good question.
Given all of the students, if we have, on average, I'll give you, we on average per quarter have about 1,300 students.
Yeah, I mean, most of my classes, it's difficult for me to ballpark because I'm not in every department. And I know some of the soft sciences, I like to call them, have much bigger.
How about a range? You can give me a range.
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm going to go with a nice round number of 100.
Okay. So we own, out of the over 600 spaces on campus, we own 115 rooms, and only 66 of those are schedulable spaces.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I nailed it. I was pretty close there. Price is right. I went under. But then
you did. You got it.
Now, what is the difference here then? Why are there on spaces you don't have access for scheduling?
So if we have, and the number of rooms in Python is actually 666, which is a very weirdo number. But we have I know.
Just to get off that,
and there are only 66 schedulable spaces, meaning that some labs are restricted, and we cannot schedule regularly operating classes in those spaces. So we can put the labs in those spaces, but that's 1 day a week. So we have to accommodate all of the other
Friday
classes.
Lab.
Exactly. And the reason the labs are on Fridays is because of those patterns. So if we have Monday, Wednesdays, and we have Tuesday, Thursdays, we can't intersperse just a random lab in the middle of those, otherwise it breaks the patterns.
Yeah, of course.
And of course, as many might know, once the schedule is released, if there are other options and students' schedules change, our office is happy to hear from faculty to make those adjustments after the schedule is open. So we can avoid the Friday classes if at all possible. So yeah, no, definitely. And it is harder with COVID. So because of the fact that the average classroom capacity is 26 people prior to any 6-foot distancing requirements. And so right now, we've been working with Tony Colon and the leadership on campus. There's so many amazing people who have been working on this. It's not easy, and it's not been, to be honest, in our perspective, it's been hard, but there has been a focus to make it work, and that is what we've been trying to do by communicating with faculty of what options they do have. We would love to do that with students too, but it's just not manageable to be able to, to do it that way. But just to give the information. So our website has a lot of information of just, the capacity. So if you're wondering what is the latest, because things keep changing, we're trying to at least have one place, in addition to the COVID site on the page, like at a glance, like what does this look like? Am I allowed to be in this space? If you're vaccinated and there's ventilation and all those things are true, then, you can request spaces on campus. So there's a lot that's going on with COVID. We're happy that things are going in a good direction right now with having people on campus, though.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the increase there in the 8 to 9 and 3 to 5 blocks has put a lot of pressure on the families for childcare, right? And
yes.
I noticed have been, for example, last quarter, yours truly I had an 8 to 9 and a 3 to 5 class with a working spouse, and that was very difficult to manage, but we did. So hopefully, I guess going forward, the constraints COVID-wise will improve, and
yes.
maybe we'll see less of that.
Yes, and that is the goal. The goal is to optimize the schedule with the idea in mind that we want to make life better. I mean, we don't want people banging on the scheduling office door saying, why do I have to come in here at 5 o'clock at night and I was in here at 8 o'clock. We don't look at it from the individual student perspective, but we do look at it from the faculty perspective, because if a faculty is splitting their day, then chances are the students are splitting their day too, and we want to avoid that and whenever possible. So it is important, and we do pay attention to those 5 o'clock classes and those early classes. And I will give you the numbers on those, because we actually do have a very low number compared of 5 o'clock classes. The 8 o'clocks are a little bit harder, but the 5 o'clocks we try to really minimize as best we can.
Yeah, for sure.
But with COVID, we've just been trying to optimize spaces to make sure that everyone can have the opportunity to learn in person if they want.
Yeah.
Prior to this quarter.
Okay. Well, great. So those are my hardest questions. Sorry if they weren't hard enough.
Well, I mean, I hope that I answered them.
Definitely. And,
okay.
Well, so here's what this is my favorite question, which is, what questions should I have asked that I didn't?
Oh my goodness, that's a great question. Let's see here. I don't know.
What did you prepare for?
I know. I'm looking at my notes here.
That I don't ask.
So I don't. I have nothing that we covered it all. I think that the main thing right now is getting spaces. One thing we didn't talk about was if people want to request a space on campus.
Okay.
Our office also manages our classroom requests through our event scheduler, and it's
now, why would
online.
a student be requesting spaces?
Study rooms.
Study groups.
Yeah, or if they are not assigned a location by their department, if it's an area that they, if they have, most classes right now are not virtual, but they were, and so when people were going in between in person and a virtual class, they needed a space, to learn. And so our system would allow you to request that. It would also allow you, to have study spaces. I know a lot of, at least my husband, who is a student here, our house is chaos, right? And so even getting in the library has spaces too, of course.
Yeah.
But if you wanted to just, take some time in between your classes and utilize an unused space, that system is available for both, faculty, staff, and students. So.
Well, great. Now, before I let you go, I understand that you are also a podcaster. So I wanted to give you a second to talk about what you do and your show, and give us a little bit of
Sure. Well, thanks for that. I'm actually, because I'm a military spouse, my background is in reporting. For those who are married or who don't have any idea what a military spouse life is like, we move from place to place just with, the service members, and have to kind of reinvent ourselves every time we go somewhere. And this opportunity to work at NPS has been awesome, because I've had some longevity within this job, and I'll get to continue to stay for a little bit longer. But the thread that's gone through my life is being able to write, and that kind of lent itself to other ways of communicating. And I often would write about military family topics. So that could be education or healthcare or, family readiness in general. And so one of the areas that kept popping up was areas of stigma and people feeling like they weren't heard, or they felt that they weren't able to access the care that they needed for some reason, or they weren't supported. And so that idea that family members might be nervous about telling their problems within this community was really something I, as a reporter, wanted to address. And so I partnered with an organization called Partners in Promise, and we put on a podcast called Disruptive Storytelling with Military Changemakers. And the first season is dedicated to combating stigma within the military community. And so it's a little bit off topic of here, but and my job at the scheduling office, but it's been really great to hear people come forward and talk about their stories in hopes to change some of the problems, not to point fingers. So it's been really great.
Well, that sounds awesome, and we'll definitely put a link on the show notes to your podcast, and I'm going to start listening to it.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, and maybe we can mutually support over here.
Absolutely.
The Trident podcast. So.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for coming today and answering all of our questions and helping the students get to know their scheduler a little bit better and how things work behind the scenes.
And if you have any complaints, you can call Adrian Gera, who is my boss. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry, Adrian.
Thanks, Jennifer.
No, thank you for having me.
Thanks for joining us in the Trident Room. This episode was recorded September 30th, 2021. For more information about today's guests and topics, please visit the show notes. The Trident Room has been brought to you by the Naval Postgraduate School Alumni Association and Foundation. For questions, comments, and suggestions, please email us at tridentroompodcasthost@nps.edu and find us online at nps.edu/Trident Room.